Hear me! New video on the channel!
Hello there, people. You know what I miss about the olden days of the 19th century? Child labor. And now, before you go call the CPS police on me, 1, I'm pretty sure I don't own a child, and 2, I'm pretty sure young Timmy here signed a 20-page document allowing me to freely express my right to employ said child into my coal mine. What goes on between 2 consenting signature blocks is of my business and my business alone. But Castle, I hear you cry. What does any of this have to do with anything? Well, I'll tell you what this is all about. Imagine with me, it's negative 40 degrees outside, and you have a furnace, but there's no coal for that furnace. Am I going to take my strong, able-bodied worker who has a craving to kill some snow bunnies, or my engineers who are busy studying? No, I'm going to take those selfish children who sit around all day reading their child literature, and put those pudgy little hands to work. For this is the world of Frostpunk, a winter hell that has seemingly no end in sight for the remaining few who have survived. Frostpunk, developed by 11-Bit Studios, the same studio behind this war of mine, is a strategy game where the sole objective is to ensure your city's survival. 11-Bit is a team that likes to question the morality of its players, and that continues on here as well. Partly inspired by the book Ice, or as the Polish say it, Lod, Earth's temperature in the 1800s slowly lowered and caused longer and longer winters until only the summers seemed to be the only escape from the cold. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You play as the British in this game.
I think it's disgusting that you're working at this time on a Sunday.
And as an American, I am contractually obligated to hate tea, crumpets, and the vowel U. The British Empire, worrying that the increasingly freezing weather got their best and brightest to come up with a heat source that's able to support well up to 1,000 people at each station. These generators are able to output enormous amounts of heat that even in the negative temperatures, people living around them are able to live relatively comfortably. Unfortunately, the cold came a little quicker than the British were ready for. Those that fled to the south to escape the cold met a grisly fate, and those that remained in London struggled for survival as it got colder and colder. Remember, this is in 1887. Warm clothing mostly just consisted of cloth. You can only put on so many layers until it doesn't really matter anymore. The only saving grace are these tiny little lamps that people wear that produce heat. This is where the main story starts. A small group of a little over 100 people board a land dreadnought to search for one of these generators up north. After getting split up with the rest of the group, 80 of the expedition finally find one of the generators. You play as the leader of this group known as the captain, and from here, the game begins with New London's fight for survival. For a strategy game, it does look very visually striking. It shouldn't be too surprising given that the camera is just constrained to one location. The game runs fine, but it can get a little bogged down late game when the temperature overlay is toggled. It is a very visually pleasing game with a lot of detail in the environment. Looking closer than what you were really meant to see with Ansel, you get to see a lot of really small detail that didn't have to be there. The heat pipes running through the roads, every person walking to and from their job, and even getting a bite to eat. It may be relatively minor, but I do like the small little touches that let you see your people more than just tiny little minions. I'm gonna guess you could tell by the name, but this game is very heavily inspired by steampunk. But whereas most steampunk media has people wearing high-tech machinery and their steam tech seems integrated into almost every part of their lives, Frostpunk is a little bit more subdued with its steampunk aesthetics. The people in Frostpunk dress appropriately for the time period, and it would seem like the world is very early into this type of steampunk age. The technical buildings clearly have a steampunk vibe to them, and the automaton robots are cool, but civilization hasn't quite yet fully become a steampunk world. And never has watching the sad lives of my population been so good on the ears. Some of the best music I have ever heard, and a good thing too because you'll be staring at this growing city for hours. It can be somber, powerful, or horrific. It just depends on what the current mood is. Getting into the gameplay, think of Frostpunk as a survival city sim. You build houses, provide for the needs of your people with medical help, food, entertainment, anything to keep the local populace from turning into Chaz. Instead of your city doing the work for you though, you need to manually decide where everybody belongs. You have your normal workers who can do anything except more technical tasks that only your engineers can fill. But the days of elite privilege are long gone now, and engineers can fill almost any role if low on manpower. Finally, there's children if you decide to sign the bill. Starting out, they can only do safe jobs like gathering supplies or cooking, but later they can be allowed to work any job that any good tax-paying worker would be able to do as well. As messed up as it is, your citizens become less and less of a vital resource as the game progresses, because sacrifices must be made for the good of the people. Glitches wise, I never saw too many, other than some options that did nothing, and the odd road that my people just refused to build, and then complained that I kept them out too late when they finally did it. Life is hard being the boss. Early on, there is a fine balance between the three main resources that can be collected. Wood and steel are used for building things and researching new advancements. Where the balancing act comes in is that housing just requires wood, and most things require more wood than steel when building. But neglect the steel for too long, and it'll cost a day or two of no advancement because you were mismanaging your resources. But the constant that'll need to be collected is coal. This is the heart of the town. Without any coal, there is no heat. Without any heat, your people will get sick and won't be able to collect the wood and steel that you need to make better buildings to acquire more coal. It is a very simple resource system, nothing near as complicated as Stellaris with its dozen or so resources. There are a few extra items that can be managed, but it is very easy to mentally digest overall. The longer the game goes on, the colder the temperature goes down. In the beginning, it'll be a nice and crisp -4 degrees. You'll soon begin to miss this number. It's a big race against Mother Nature to keep the city alive. Just when you're getting comfortable, the wind picks up and it plummets the temp down by 20 degrees. Now even the tents people are living in are unlivable, and resources need to go into increasing the heat output of the generator. The secondary resource that needs to be managed on top of the physical ones are that of your people. 2 bars, discontent and hope. Discontent is the measure of how angry the populace is. Just like real life, it can be managed through laws and opening up strip clubs to let people blow off steam and forget their worries. The second one, hope, is a little more complex. This is the will of the people. If 10 people die in one night because there aren't enough medical centers, people will lose hope. And it's a lot harder to make people hopeful after their entire household just died of frostbite. Hope is increased mainly through events, not having anybody die, and laws. Laws can be thought of as a skill tree, whereas the workshops upgrade buildings and such. The law system is the meat of the morality in Frostpunk. They are a neat way to let the player decide what type of town they want. Whether the captain is on the golden path and treats his people well, or survival of the fittest kind of mentality. My main issue of the system is that there are some options that are obviously better than others. One of the first laws you can sign is the soup law. Now, food production is increased, and all the downside is that discontent rises. The other option is food additives, which does increase food production even more, but also has a chance to make people sick. On higher difficulties, this isn't viable because you're already short on manpower, and even by the mid-game, food shouldn't even really be an issue anymore. The more baffling one is the option between sustain life and radical treatment. For the former, you can keep your gravely ill people alive by keeping them in care houses, but they will be a burden forever. Radical treatment involves a simple medical procedure, and they are a burden as well, but they can return to work once they're given a prosthetic, which gives them their lives back in the process. The last Autumn DLC pretty much solved the law tree, so I'm glad the devs agreed that there were a few pointless choices in the original system. Eventually, scouts will be researched through the tech tree. These guys are the biggest group of badasses that you will ever meet. The normal citizen in Frostpunk will complain and get sick when it's a little too cold in their house. Meanwhile, scouts are a 5-man team of gigachads that never complain, never need food, sleep, and punch bears in the face. These guys are the lifeblood of your city because they will drag literal tons of supplies on their sleds back to the city. And just as things were starting to get nice, the scouts come across another city in the tundra. The great city of Winterhome, or a better word would be was great. The The generator failed, riots erupt, and it seemed that everyone in Winterhome died. This, of course, doesn't sit well with the people back home, and everybody starts to freak out. We have two choices: either fall back on religion and pray to regain hope, or order and discipline to maintain the law. It's up to the player, but I love a good dictatorship. Unfortunately, these two paths don't have much of a difference other than thematically. They both have abilities to increase hope and lower discontent, and not much else is really that different. When you first start signing new laws, it'll be pretty simple. Neighborhood watch, yeah, makes sense. Make sure everybody's doing good and not causing trouble for anybody else. But then the Londoners come and make things even more complicated. Every day, more people will join up with them, and when the clock runs out, they'll all leave and head back to London. This is almost certainly a death trap, walking all the way back, but these people are so desperate that they're willing to do anything just to survive. So it's up to us to regain people's hope and change their minds about leaving. Morning gatherings. Talk about the day's duties and make sure everyone is on the same page. Foreman. Have someone supervise the workplace and ensure that things are being done right. Patrols. Have guards patrol the streets to keep the city in order. Propaganda center. Ensure that people don't get the wrong ideas and spread flyers warning them to stay away from the Londoners. Prisons. Keep criminals and those with dangerous ideas locked away. There is a very clear line here, and we have obviously crossed it. In the beginning, it's all about keeping hope high and convincing people not to leave, but by the end, you, the captain, have become so power hungry that you name a new world order after yourself and erect an execution platform. Those that haven't been fooled are scared into obedience or made examples of. It is a very slow descent that the game fully fools you into taking. There's no way to keep the Londoners from leaving other than enacting these laws. It was for the greater good, but now we're in charge of a dictatorship. Oftentimes, discontent can get so high that without the prison, propaganda, and patrols, it would be impossible to manage, and the city would become unstable and end up just like Winterhome. In the end, your people are the real tragedy of Frostpunk. The game goes so far to reinforce that these are real people. It gives a quick summary about what their life is like even. In the end though, as long as the coal train keeps pumping, their lives can be forfeited and kept in line with false promises. Other than the main story, there are several other scenarios that can be played. A New Home is the easiest one of these two. The Arcs is all about building a bunch of automatons with a very limited amount of people, while Refugees is about managing a very large influx of people early on. The final scenarios were DLC, and they offer much different challenges. My personal favorite is the Fall of Winterhome. It takes place just after the people there booted the last mayor out, and now it's your turn to try and fix things. Here you start with a whole city, a very disorganized city. There's enough people to do pretty much anything you need, but the challenge is to keep as many people alive as possible as more and more curveballs get thrown at you. The Last Autumn is the most unique out of everything else here. It takes place in the summer, right before the Great Freeze happens. Cold isn't an issue. It is 50 degrees positive outside. Here, the goal is to build a generator. As I said, the laws here have been completely redone, and the two sides the player picks work a lot better than the base game. The engineers are more worried about workplace safety and improving efficiency, while the workers work more with keeping motivation high and having less strikes. Much like the base game, everything in the beginning seems pretty straightforward and makes sense, but my god, it gets even darker than before. You either execute the upper class or build a work camp. Neither are pretty. Finally, we have On the Edge, which takes place right after A New Home. New London sends out an expedition towards a mine to collect steel and steam cores to help the city grow. On the Edge has cool ideas, but overall, it doesn't do anything to make it stand out nearly as much as The Last Autumn did. A funny thing about Frostpunk is that it doesn't seem like a game that has a lot of replayability, but looking at my hours, I found tons to replay. This has become my ultimate challenge game. How high up the difficulty slider can you beat the game? Can you not cross the line of laws? Can you somehow manage the Golden Path achievement? Extreme difficulty is what separates the men from the boys. On extreme, people get sick just by walking outside for too long, and hospitals are filled with people by the end of the 5th day. I don't even want to think about all the times I had to restart just to beat the main story on Extreme, only to find out that there is no achievement for it and I had to beat it on Survivor. There is an endless mode, but there isn't enough content to justify it. Once you make your endgame city, there really isn't any goals to strive for. The biggest tragedy about Frostpunk is that there is no mod support. This would have been an infinitely replayable game if people could just make their own scenarios, add custom tech, laws, events. The list is endless. Frostpunk 2 was announced a year and a half ago and just started flying in beta testers to Poland, so fingers crossed that we get a sequel this year and that it supports mods. But in the meantime, there's hopefully a Halo video that I'll actually finish before then, and maybe even a revisit to Dead Space. Time will tell.